Like you guys are big in the community. So I was just wondering, how do you market yourself?
This is one of those things where we're just like in a bit of an unfair position. You have 500 times as much data.
I know that there's a lot of like controversy with Fab. Has Fab like impacted you guys in any way?
It
I think that's a trick also, because I see a lot of asset creators is making for example, combat systems once again.
really hard to stand out. You need something that makes people go, whoa, that's super cool. Because on landscape, if you have a mountain and you want to make a cave in that mountain, you can't. And with Voxel Plugin, you just... Now I'm going to say something that may need to be cut out, which is that...
What's up, guys? Welcome to my new podcast. I've been trying to do this for over the last year, but we are finally here. This is going to be one of the most valuable podcasts in the whole Unreal Engine community, so I'm very excited to finally bring this to life. For our first guest, we have no other than Victor, one of the creators of the famous Voxel Plugin tool for Unreal Engine. Thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, no problem. Really happy to be here. So I'll just quickly introduce Voxel Plugin. Voxel Plugin is a plugin for Unreal Engine, for those that don't know, where we sort of do a lot of the stuff that the standard Unreal Engine landscape tool does for, rendering terrains and that sort of thing. But we then do it in 3D instead of 2D, because on landscape, if you have a mountain and you want to make a cave in that mountain, you can't. So you have to start doing all sorts of trickery. And with Voxel Plugin, you just dig a cave, and then there's a cave, and it just works. So that's the short version, and then we do like procedural generation tooling alongside that.
Yeah.
We have a deep integration with PCG for procedural stuff. The rabbit hole goes deep, but the gist of it is we do landscapes, but in 3D.
Wow, that's amazing. No, definitely. I mean, the plugin, through the years and through its different versions, has allowed hundreds of game devs out there to create massive, beautiful worlds with a really easy process, right? So it's really, really cool. So yeah, if you want, we can talk a bit about yourself, your background, when did you get involved in Voxel Plugin, and so on.
Yeah, so Voxel Plugin came around, I think, in like 2015-ish is when it really started, but then it didn't actually become a more public thing until 2017.
Yeah,
it was created by another Victor Karai, who goes by the screen name Firenaz.
yeah.
And at that point, it really was just a hobby project. He was working at other studios as just a full-time engineer. He was otherwise engaged, and the plugin was just a fun thing to be working on because it was really into working on voxels. So that was just
that's cool.
a rabbit hole he was going down. And then I myself have a partial business degree. I dropped out because I found it exceptionally boring. But I went to do that because I'm a self-taught technical artist, and I've been doing that since like 2013. And I figured it would be good to get a degree, but something that would build on what I already have, because ideally I wanted to be in the indie space and I wanted to just actually run a studio.
Right.
So it would be good to have some more formal business education, because it's a subject I'm interested in, but it's always good to actually have an idea of what people think you should be doing in a particular industry you're interested in. So I went and tried to get a business degree. That was not a great success. Didn't have a lot of fun with that. Learned some things and moved on. Then went to get my first industry job as a technical artist, as in like what I call industry job being like a studio where I just like actually went through the formal application process instead of just knowing people who happen to be working on things.
Cool.
And I did that for a while, and then after a while I moved on from there and was wondering what to do with my life, and then I ended up talking to Fi about Voxel Plugin, because he was also at a stage where he was trying to figure out what to do for next steps with his career and everything. And the logical next step to me was, well, you have this plugin that could just be a full-time endeavor, so why don't you just do that?
Yeah.
So we talked about that a bunch, and then he talked me into being a support guy for him, and then I did part-time Voxel Plugin stuff and part-time another project. And then a month after we had discussed that, and we'd been talking about moving him getting into Voxel Plugin more full time and making it a proper business, he went like, "Yeah, actually, I'd really like to have you just actually on board full time, so that we can just actually run this as a business together." Which was great, but also a bit awkward that came a month after. So
I
then I
see.
had to wrap up my other project
Yeah.
and move on to Voxel Plugin. But then from there, we very much set our sights on, okay, Voxel Plugin has some core things it wants to do. It wants to bring
Mhm.
interactivity. It wants to
Yeah.
bring procedural world building, but also the in between. So not like, in stock landscapes, you just sculpt things.
Yeah.
And then when you say Voxel plugin, people think something like No Man's Sky, where everything's procedural.
Yeah.
And
It's a
that's what Voxel
combination, right?
plugin 1 focused on. But in Voxel plugin 2, we also really wanted to bring a focus to what I call guided procedural generation,
Right.
which is where, as an artist, you place a stamp that places a mountain, and that mountain is largely procedural, but the
Right.
artist controls where the mountain is, how tall it is,
Yeah.
etc.
It's pretty much like a
So
tool.
that
Yeah.
Exactly, so that you just speed up the iteration process for the artists versus taking away all of the control and just making the world creation a black box,
Yeah.
because for a lot of
Yeah.
games that doesn't work. Um, so with Voxel Plugin 2, we're trying to really make a complete solution, a holistic solution, because in Voxel Plugin 1, we had a lot of systems that, we have a lot of cool features, but if you use A, you can't use B.
Right.
So
Yeah.
then people come in going like, "Oh, I saw A and I saw B, and now I want to make a game with them together." And we're like, "Yeah, you can't."
You can. Yeah.
So with Voxel Plugin 2, we're really trying to make it that everything works with everything. Um, and hopefully it'll just make sense to use, and it works with Nanite and
Yeah.
Lumen and all the new render text and stuff, and it works with PCG, and hopefully it just does everything.
Trust everything. One plugin. That's so cool. Yeah. And it's cool that you mentioned the thing about the first plugin, having the focus on like procedural generation and so on. And the second one, also that, but mainly on the artistic tools. Because in many of these open world games, especially with No Man's Sky when it came out, it was a huge world, but it was empty, right? That
Yeah.
was the problem. But if you give the manual like creative side of things, the tools and so on, they can create a really detailed environment and really like make an interesting game, which is one of the most important things when creating a huge world. So yeah, amazing. And also it shows that you don't need a full degree or whatever to be a successful game dev, I guess, and be involved
No,
in
you just need to be
crazy
really
stuff.
curious. Go
Yeah,
down
very
rabbit.
curious and just put it work. That's amazing. So yeah, in team size, it's mainly you guys too, right? Fire and Ants
So
and
we have
you.
one other engineer, and so Phi is really good at low level stuff. He's really
Yeah,
good at architectural thinking and figuring out how to solve complex rendering problems and just really optimize nitty gritty.
right.
But he's not the best at user experience related things. And he really doesn't enjoy working on things like UI.
Yeah,
Um, and he can do it, but he's slow at it because it's not a passion. And it tends to end up being not the best because he gets bored and wants to just move on to other things.
yeah,
Um, so we brought in another engineer, Elandas, who focuses. He does a lot of stuff. It's not fair to say that he's just a front end engineer because he's not. He does a lot of low level
also
stuff
yeah,
as well. Um, and he does a lot of random tech art stuff as well. He's like quite a jack of all trades at this point. But his focus initially and the core thing he is responsible for within the plugin is that we work together to go through the entire plugin and make sure that everything is actually nice to use.
right.
So anything that relates to actual usability and how the user interacts with something, like if you drag a stamp into the world to place a mountain, how all of that UI looks, all of that is Elandas's job.
Well,
And I look at it with him to go like, okay, how can we make this work well from an artist perspective? Because I'm obviously more of an artist.
Yeah.
But then, because I would not have the patience to actually sit down and implement all of those pretty little custom
Yeah,
details
the
panels
little
that we have
things.
everywhere.
Yeah. It's more of a pure coder, right? It will make the
Yes,
put in C++
exactly.
and make it work. So yeah, it
Yeah.
makes sense. That's cool. Yeah. So wow. I mean, anyways, a team of three. That's really insane for the plugin that you guys are producing and everything. Really, really amazing. Um, Overall, how do you think that the plugin, through all these years and iterations, like has helped indie game devs, or especially solo game devs, like create their games and implement like cool environments into their worlds?
So honestly, the main things that we've seen are just really cool ways to use the interactivity. And that's the main thing
Yeah.
we've heard from some of the successful indies that have used the plugin as well, that they just make something with Voxel plugin. An example of this is Severed Steel.
Oh yeah.
Um, and they make something that like centers around this interactivity part of the plugin.
Yeah.
So you can destroy things with every bullet and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Very
And that's
interactive.
really a central part of the game. And then after they've made a game like that, the next time we talk to them, they're like, "Yeah, we really just like want to keep doing this because that interactivity, the ability to make the world not static, changes how you approach game design and how players approach your game so much.
Yeah.
That is just super super fun." Um,
Yeah.
so
Oh
that's the thing where we've seen the biggest change, but that also makes sense that that's where we've seen the biggest change because Voxel Plugin 1 didn't have a lot to offer when it came to making really humongous complex worlds
yeah.
because the graph system was relatively limited. Um, Voxel Plugin 2 will be better at that.
Oh,
But
that's cool.
Voxel Plugin 1 was really best when it was relatively static, so not super complex procedural
Right.
generation,
Static.
and
Yeah.
then really focusing on the player interactivity. And that's where we've seen a lot of really cool stuff happen.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you are, as a player playing the game and you shoot bullets and there's a hole, that's a whole different thing. That's what like Rockstar Games is like developing and so on. So it's really, really high tech and nice. And I guess that's a bit more of a question for Faroness because of the beginning of the plugin and so on. But why do you guys like go with Unreal Engine 5 instead of maybe Unity, Godot, or a custom engine? Like, why is it Unreal Engine 5?
So the I can't actually answer for Fi here. Obviously, I'm not an engineer. I didn't start the plugin. I don't. I can't speak to his decision making here. But I started my game dev journey in CryEngine, and
Wow,
then I
CryEngine.
moved to Unity,
Yeah,
and that was still Unity 4. Then I moved to Unreal Engine 4. I tried moving to Unreal a couple of times,
yeah,
and every time I bailed because the learning curve was too steep.
yeah, yeah.
And then eventually I got fed up enough to actually stick with it. But it took a while.
Yeah,
And the reason for that was that in Unity, everything is a black box. So whenever you want to fix something, like you run into a weird physics issue,
yeah,
you have no way to debug that properly. And
right,
even if you are able to find the cause, engines have bugs.
yeah,
And in Unreal, if you encounter a critical bug, you can go into the source code and figure out exactly why
fix it.
it's happening and do things about it. In
Yeah,
Unity, you don't have the source code, and this is changing. So, like, this is not a reflection of where Unity is now, which is
yeah,
deeply invested in Unreal. So we don't even have to think about this.
yeah, sure.
But at the time, Unity made no sense for like really low level stuff because it was just not easy enough to extend
Mhm.
and debug when it came to complex systems.
Yeah,
And then Godot didn't even exist at the time. So,
yeah, that's true. It didn't exist at that
and
time.
CryEngine is the same story as Unity, where it's just like closed
Uh,
source and you can't do anything. So,
yeah, I guess it
yeah,
was the customization, right? The amount
yeah.
of engine work that you can adapt into the plugin. That's cool. Yeah, I also spent a lot of years with Unity, And I mean, Unreal Engine, I just feel like, out of the box and default, like for any solo game that is just like a bit, straightforward to work with. Like Unity has the reputation of being like easy to learn, but through this last years in Unreal, I feel like, with blueprints and just the user interface and the community, it has been easier for people to learn. It's true what you said about the steep learning curve. Definitely after some
The
time.
big issue coming into Unreal, for me at least, and this is better with UE5, but it's still there to
Yeah,
some extent, is in Unity, you have game objects and prefabs, and then from there it's kind of just, if you want to do things, you put a C# script on your game object,
exactly.
and
A
that's
component
kind
that
of
you
it.
have to. Yeah,
And then you come into Unreal, and it's like, you right click in the content browser, and there's a list
it's a
with
million things.
15 categories of each with like 6 different
Yeah,
asset types, and you're
yeah,
like, what do I do with any of this? And then the toolbar in UE4 was just like, 80 humongous buttons with drop downs and stuff,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's just,
I
how
get
do
you.
I
Yeah,
engage with any of these systems? There's
yeah,
so much overhead and
yes,
boilerplate in a lot of Unreal systems. But then the big benefit is that you don't have to build all of that yourself if you need it.
yeah. There's a lot more
So it makes it
pre-built
harder
stuff.
to get
Yeah.
into. But once you get past that UX hurdle,
Hmm.
it's really powerful and it's really
Yeah.
good to use.
Yeah, Unity is more like we have the universal component system, right? You have a game object
Yeah.
in the level, you drag the script, and it's all around that workflow. And Unreal Engine is more like, let's say, preset class, preset templates, and you need to work around that. So yeah, it's exactly what you said. You need to learn more of what each thing does and the UI.
Well, and
It's,
just like, in Unity, you pick a material, which generally you will pick the
mm,
standard PBR material and just assign
yeah,
your textures, and that's pretty much all
yeah,
you've got. And
yeah.
if you want something more complex, you go onto the asset store and buy one of the like pre-made fancy
Shaders
things
and
and
yeah,
plonk it
also,
on there.
mm,
And again, you just assign your textures and move on.
yeah,
And then in Unreal, you have a material editor. And
yeah,
even if you're a programmer, material editors are weird because they're a really different kind of programming, because you don't have state. Like, you can't go, what's the
yeah. There's
value of
no
the pixel next to me?
space. Yeah,
So shader programming is really weird if you're used to just CPU programming.
mm,
Um, and that makes it really hard because people expect to be able to do things that they can't do.
yeah,
So
yeah,
there's a lot of friction in that. And Unreal doesn't ship any sort of standards, just use this material. Export your
yeah.
textures from
They don't give you
Substance
a
Painter
default
and
material
assign this
instance.
material.
Yeah,
There is no workflow like that. You have
mm,
to go build materials or
yeah,
use marketplace assets, but the marketplace assets will be case specific. So then
yeah. Obviously, yeah.
it's
Oh,
complicated. There's
then,
just a lot more friction in every part of the workflow there.
yeah, yeah. Even for me, I feel like the material editors where I feel most limited. If I want to do a
Yep.
crazy shader, it's hard. Like I might know C Sharp, Blueprint, C++, all this, but when it comes to materials, it's a whole different thing. It's its own like language.
Materials are just math.
Yeah,
That's the only thing you get to do.
for sure. Yeah, that's the thing.
That's
But
fun because I used to suck at math, and now the material editor is my home, and I love it.
oh, there you go. Now you're all into the material editor, right? So you're the best.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, talking about those challenges, what would you say it was like the biggest challenge when developing Voxel Plugin 2 and all the systems?
This is a bit of a lame answer, probably, because it comes not from a tech or systems angle, but the hardest thing for us has been to walk the line, to try and figure out when to stop iterating and when to just push a bloody release.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Because, as some of our community members may know, Voxel Plugin 2 has been in the works for, let me check,
Sometimes. Yeah.
3 years,
Yes.
three and a
Yeah.
half. So it's been a little while.
Yeah.
Um, and it's really complicated because with the kind of system we're making, and this is something you see with Epic within Unreal itself as well,
Hmm.
um, you have to make really long-term decisions.
Yeah.
Because release, if we like actually release, not a preview, but the actual release, and we go, this is how the plugin works, And then we want to add the next feature, which is on the roadmap. And we realize that the core design, we thought it would work, but actually now that we're implementing it practically, we're running into some roadblocks and we need to change something about the core design.
Right.
Sorry for hitting the microphone. We need to change the core design to allow for this other feature to work properly.
Yeah.
We can't do that if we have released already.
Yeah.
So the last 2.5 years has been us just iterating like madmen
Keeping up
through
with
the
epic
core
news.
systems and going like, okay, we're doing everything in graphs. So like we don't have an actor in the scene which just like renders your world. We have a node within a graph which says render the world, and you can feed whatever data you want into that so that the user has complete control.
Yeah.
And then that gives us a lot of possibilities. And then we end up ping-ponging to the other side where we're like, okay, this actually sucks because this puts way too much burden on the user. There's way too much friction involved in doing anything. You should just be able to like a lot of the users of the plugin aren't technical. They just want to make a pretty world. They should just be able to drag a thing into the scene and have it work. They shouldn't need to make a whole bunch of complex graphs for that. So that's an example of that kind of iteration. But as you go back and forth, everything has pros and cons. There is no perfect solution. So the only thing you can do there is to just actually go back and forth and try things. And that takes time.
That takes time.
And that's really hard because we want to ship the product and we want our users to not have to wait any longer, because obviously we don't want them to just sit there waiting for 2.5 years either. But also, if we ship, we're stuck with what we shipped. So, I mean, even now, and this is little things because we're finally in a place where we're genuinely happy with the core framework we have, but we run into little things where like a particular node in our graph system is a bit counterintuitive to use, and we would like to change it.
Right.
And yeah, I came across something the other day. So we have a noise node, and you have an amplitude, and you have a feature scale.
Yeah.
And then you have a modifier for that, and like one of these is supposed to be a number larger than 1, and the other one is supposed to be a number smaller than 1.
Yeah.
And I suddenly realized, like, why do these operate on opposite scales? They should both be smaller than 1 or both be larger than 1. They should like work in the same way. Why are they different? And I want to change that, but we can't because people are already using this node in their graphs. They might have complicated math setup plugged into that pin. So we can't suddenly invert the behavior on that because it's going to break everything that people already made. So we're just stuck with it, which sucks.
We're stuck with it, yeah. Well, definitely, I feel, that will be the biggest challenge for you guys because, I mean, it's similar for me for certain like projects or videos. It's like you never know when the final product is good, like maybe I need to make one more edit.
Good enough.
Yeah, just improve anything. But of course, there's a difference between a 20-minute video and a whole plugin that took years to make. So yeah,
but the core premise is the same. When it's out there, and you have to deal with it for the rest of your life.
It's just being careful, let's say. But yeah, and how do you guys go about managing support and community and all this stuff?
It's been a journey. We have, for the most part, a super friendly, inconsiderate, and respectful community, which is a godsend, really. And they are, for the most part, so patient and respectful of the fact that we are doing this stupid journey. So that's just incredible. And other than that, we just try to be open. We try to keep everyone in the loop on like the steps we're going through. And when people bring up concerns that, they're frustrated with how we're doing things or how a particular plugin system works or that the previous iteration of something was better, we just explain all of the steps that led us to where we are now. And we try and be as open as possible about all of that. And that definitely doesn't solve all of the problems because like we just talked about, there isn't a perfect solution in a lot of cases. So inevitably, we are going to make some people unhappy with decisions we make.
Of course, that's impossible, to satisfy everyone.
But we try our best. We try and find
Yeah.
good middle grounds, and we explain why we pick the middle grounds that we pick, and we try to keep the code set up in a way that it's reasonably possible for people to make their own versions of core systems if they particularly need to.
Yeah.
It might not be super easy. Like, um, there have been iterations of the plugin previously where that was easier. As it is right now, it's
Right.
definitely a little bit more of a black box. But we do try and keep things organized so that, like, less on the rendering side and stuff, but when it comes to just things you might want to do to generate your world, it's really straightforward to implement completely custom nodes.
Yeah.
And it requires C++, so that's
Yeah.
a barrier to entry.
That's
But
big. Yeah.
beyond that, you just write your thing in C++, and for the most part, it works. There aren't,
Yeah.
like, we try and keep things straightforward so that things are flexible, even if we can't support them out of the box.
Yeah.
Um,
I see.
that doesn't entirely address the actual question you ask. um, but yeah, the gist of it is just we try our best. We try and be
Yeah.
open and transparent with the community, and thank
Yeah.
God they're generally quite respectful and considerate, and probably more so than I would have expected a lot of the time.
Yeah, very very patient. But yeah, that's
Yes.
really cool. I mean, yeah, I definitely like have been in your community for some time. People are very excited, very into the plugin. Which leads into another question, like why? I mean, this is a bit, I guess, a bit technical, but like, why do you think that voxel is better than regular rendering techniques, like for example the default landscape tool? And I mean, I
Yep.
guess it's self-explanatory with all the things that you're doing, like holes, tunnels, caves, and everything. But why
So
voxel?
there's two parts. There's like two, maybe three different things that the plugin tackles. The
Yeah.
one is what we actually have in the name, the voxel part.
Yeah.
And that immediately implies the other two for most people, which is great, but not entirely fair. Because when people think about a game where you can interact with the terrain, when people think, for instance, of Valheim, you
Hmm.
can modify the terrain with your shovel and stuff, people think that's voxels. Valheim does not have a voxel terrain. Valheim has height maps.
Yeah.
Um, and Valheim is procedurally generated. So people go, oh, it's voxels, because they
Yeah.
associate procedural generation and interactivity with voxels. But that's not mutually exclusive. You can have a height map terrain that has these things, like Valheim does.
Yeah.
The We just happen to be solving both. um,
Oh, that's amazing.
and that's kind of like, you could build a height map solution that does the procedural generation and the interactivity, but once you start doing procedural generation and especially interactivity, and in most
Hmm.
procedural games you kind of also want the interactivity, sometimes you
Yeah.
don't, but most of the time if you're making a game with procedural worlds you also want
Mm.
interactivity with that world.
Yeah.
um, and the moment you want interactivity, it feels really weird to use height maps a lot of the time,
Right.
because if your player has a shovel and they dig and they want to make a tunnel, but instead the terrain just keeps going down, that
Yeah.
doesn't feel good. They'll
That's
just
yeah.
get annoyed.
More immersion.
So the moment you start doing interactivity, it makes more sense to go with voxels than it does
Mm.
to go with height maps.
Yeah.
That said, there's drawbacks. We talk about this a lot, but in our plugins system, we spend a lot of time optimizing, and it's basically just like compression algorithms a lot of the time,
Right.
because when you're working with a height map, say you have a 2 kilometer square terrain and you want 50 centimeter resolution, which is twice what the default landscape resolution is, so that's already pretty good.
Okay.
You're looking at a single 4K texture to represent that height map, which
Whoa.
means that you're talking about
Mm.
4,000 by 4,000 values.
Yeah.
So you can like math the result of that out. I don't know that off the top of my head. It's a few million, maybe 60 million actually. But anyway, you compute X million values.
Mm.
Now say you add a volumetric dimension to it, because when you have a height map, you know for every XY coordinate we have a single height. We can just point to this place on the map, and we can plug the XY coordinates in and read that texture, and we know this is how high it's going to be. But what if you might have a cave underneath it? You can't just like plug the XY coordinates in and read the texture anymore. You have to plug XYZ coordinates in.
Right.
And so now we have 4,000 by 4,000 by however many vertical tiles you have, which quickly goes up to hundreds, thousands, which means that, if you have 4,000 by 4,000, but you need 500 vertical range, you have 500 times as much data.
Wow. That's crazy.
It's a problem. And this is why there aren't that many voxel plugins. And this is why what we do takes time and is complicated and all that. But so, like, in an ideal world, and we have talked about this in the past, in an ideal world, we would have a voxel plugin pipeline which completely bypasses all of the volumetric stuff, where it's just height only, because it would allow for a lot of substantial optimizations. It would allow generation to go much faster. It would make it much easier to cache the worldscape, because right now we recompute a lot of stuff all the time, because caching volumetric data, again, 500 times as much data, a 4K texture you can keep in memory all the time. 500 of them, you can't.
No way.
So we have to think about why we can't cache that much data when we're doing things volumetrically. With height, we could. So we thought about splitting that into a separate pipeline. But we only have so much time in a day. So as much as we would love to do this, we also need to actually release things. So this is not something we're doing short term. But ideally, for a lot of use cases, you would have a height-only workflow or a height-only terrain system that does this. Because in a lot of cases, the voxels aren't necessarily what you want. But we went all the way on that. And now it is what it is.
Now there's no you're gonna go back. Wow. But I mean, one of the questions I was gonna ask is, how does it run so smoothly, right?
With great effort.
For example, the version 1 run super smooth. So I mean, that definitely is crazy when you think about all the things behind it, because also when people think on voxels, I think because of Minecraft, they think on cubes, only cubes. But it goes a million times further than that. It can really look like the most photorealistic thing ever. So it's definitely crazy things. It's very innovative also. That's why when No Man's Sky was going out, it was a huge deal and things like that, right? So I mean, it's crazy that you guys are putting all of this into a plugin, and it's not selfish keeping it to yourself to make the next Minecraft 2, and whatever, right?
Hopefully,
it's amazing.
Plugin 2, when it comes out, we intend to have a free release again. And I can't say for sure yet what's going to be in it, but it's going to be better than the free release that we had for the first plugin. So you're going to be able to use graphs and all that sort of thing. You're going to be able to do a lot of the stuff that you can do in the full plugin, just at a slightly limited scale. So the idea is that you'll be able to make games with it, just not as big and varied. So you can test all of the plugin systems and do everything, just not quite at the same scale as you would otherwise.
That's amazing. That's really cool.
And that's actually, you're not asking about this, but I want to address this, because sometimes we get the question of why is this so expensive, and why don't you make it free, or can't you offer a discount? It's just, if we make things cheaper, we get more customers, but we don't most likely get as many more customers as the percentage that we drop the price by. So most likely we lose money, or maybe we make a little bit more money. But on the flip side, we have way more users, which means we have to spend way more time doing support. We have way more weird use cases, way more weird crashes and edge cases to debug. We spend so much more time on other things than just developing the core plugin. And that doesn't make sense. And then we'd love to just make the plugin free. But again, we have the same problem. We do, in fact, need to eat. so
you
that
guys
we
have
can develop the plugin. Because
you
if
know
we don't get paid for working on the plugin, we go back to it being a side project, which
yeah
kind of sucks.
which reduces a
Um,
lot of possibilities.
yeah. So
Yeah
yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because I suddenly thought about it. We sometimes get these questions on the Discord, and we try and again just very
mhm.
openly talk about this.
Yeah,
Like,
for sure.
we do think about this. We really do want to democratize these tools as much as possible, but
Mhm.
also we do actually need to be a functional business
Yeah,
because we live in a capitalist society.
yeah, of course. And I mean, I think you find, you guys found like a really good strategy with a free limited version and then the full, plugin at a good price, because it's like, for example, if someone wants to play around with the plugin, they have this free version which they can test around. They have some things to do, but then if they want to go and make a serious game about it, which they know that like, they might have like some money coming in, they can invest into your plugin,
Yeah.
right? It's an investment.
No, the
And
tricky thing, the always the hardest thing for us on the licensing front is just our pricing is clearly based around Western developers.
mhm.
And that means that people from places with lower incomes are kind of shafted when it comes to
Yeah,
being able to access the plugin.
yeah,
And
yeah,
we hate that. We would love to do something about that. But at the same time, there is nothing we can do about that because
yeah.
just standards of
it's
living are different
it's
in
hard.
different places. And we
Yeah,
can't, like, the marketplace, as far as I'm aware, doesn't even have any framework for regional pricing. But then, even if
yeah,
it did, it's so easy to just like VPN to another spot and buy it for 5 pennies and then move on
yeah,
with your life. And like, there's so many humongous caveats there. So our approach now, our take on it is we're going to do our best to make it so that the free version of the plugin is going to be usable for those people. And it's not going to be able to do everything, but we really hope that's going to be just
that's
good
amazing.
enough
Yeah.
and that it fills that hole a little bit. But we recognize the problem, and I'm sorry that we can't do anything better
Yeah,
about it.
no, you guys are doing great. Yeah, for sure. Like, even in my community, there's a lot of people from, these countries that, yeah, is, they have a shitty laptop and it's even hard for them to get the hardware, right, to make games. So,
Yep.
yeah, it's great that you guys are having like all that in consideration and everything. It's really, really cool. And speaking on like the real marketplace and so on, I know that there's a lot of like controversy with Fab and so on, but I know that you guys also like have your own website where you offer the plugin to there and so on. So like, how it has Fab like impacted you guys in any way, or what you think about
It
Fab in general?
it has, and we've had conversations and meetings with the Fab folks, and they're all
Mm,
lovely people.
yeah.
And I can promise you that they really, really, really are doing their best in a really
Mhm.
messy and complicated situation. It is much, much more complicated to be doing their job than it looks from the outside.
Yeah.
Um, that said, there are problems, undeniably. So I respect the people there a lot, and
Mhm.
I recognize that they're doing a really hard job. But also, the reality is that in a lot of ways, we do struggle. There's a lot of things that we have to deal with, which
Yeah.
we would rather not have to deal with. Um, as Voxel Plugin, um, some of the other creators on the marketplace or now Fab are struggling with visibility.
Yeah. Disability, right?
We are in a lucky position to not struggle with that much because
Hmm.
people know we exist. Our traffic never came from the marketplace front page. Our
Hmm.
traffic just comes from us being kind of the only solution that does this.
Yeah. Also.
Um,
Hmm.
so we're in a very lucky position on that front. In the past, we considered, and this was before Fab was even announced, previously we considered leaving the marketplace entirely
Hmm.
and only selling Voxel Plugin 2 through our own website.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that anymore. Most likely, we will stick with Fab
Okay.
for like small business licenses.
Yeah. That's
Um,
cool.
but we are trying to set things up in a way. The big problem that we run into with Fab is I forget exactly what the situation is here because I haven't thought about this in a little bit. But Fab has introduced the license tiers. And to be clear, this is the biggest problem we have with Fab because, again, we're in a really lucky position where a
Yeah.
lot of the other frustrations aren't that big of a deal for us. There are a
Yeah.
lot of other problems with Fab. But the biggest problem for us is that the license tiers that exist are capped in terms of price, and there's only two. So, like,
Yeah.
we would want a thing where we sell a personal license or small business license, which is 350 US dollars, and you can use that until a certain revenue. I
Yeah.
forget where Fab has the cap. If they put it at 100 grand, we've been
Yeah. I
talking
think it's
internally, and
100K. Something
I
like that.
can't say yet where we're going to end up on this. So really, don't take this anywhere. But we have talked about whether we want to raise our cap internally from 100K to 500K for the standard pricing,
Right.
just because realistically, any company under 500K still really isn't that big.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is the problem on the Fab side. We don't have control over that.
Yeah. 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 Makes a lot of sense.
And the other thing is that on our side, we want way more complicated large business licenses. Like, we want to be able to offer support, we want to have rolling contracts and stuff. Like, licensing this kind of software solution B2B, business to business, is much
Yeah.
more complicated and much more involved than just charging them a $10,000 price once,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they want ongoing things, which means
Yeah. Different.
we need to do that externally because Fab only allows us to just set a price for that second license bracket, and it doesn't allow us to just
Yeah.
not
The
have it, for
range.
instance.
Change the
Because
range.
what we want to do really is just go, if you're under this revenue, you can buy it here on Fab. If you're over this revenue, you can't, and you have to contact us.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah. That would be the
Because
ideal.
there's just no reasonable way that Fab can actually represent the complexity that we need from large business
Yeah.
contracts
Yeah.
in any sane way. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, hopefully, Fab could implement a way for that, not only for you guys, but any dev out there that has, this big
and
plugin there.
that's one of the frustrating things. Like, we are multiple people full time, and
Let me see.
did my internet
I'm
go?
just losing your connection. Let me see. Okay, I'm back. I'm back. I'm back.
Okay,
Sorry.
cool. Yeah, sorry, I'm on Starlink, and it's mostly good.
No worries. Oh,
Very
yeah, Starlink.
occasionally there will be dropouts.
How is Starlink?
Um,
Is it good?
it's mostly good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not perfect, but it's adequate.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, no, honestly, it was all good. It was like 2 seconds only. That's
Yep.
cool.
Um, the most frustrating thing is that we are multiple people. We're full time. We can afford to spend some resources trying to find solutions to these problems.
Yeah.
So, like, for the longest time, actually, the entire lifetime of the marketplace, there was no way to verify users through
Right.
the marketplace API. Like, ideally, you would just, we all have our support discords and that sort of thing, and you
Mm-hmm.
would want to verify that users coming in
Yeah.
actually bought the
Yes.
plugin
Yeah.
or whatever other product. And the marketplace didn't have a good API for that. And on our
Right.
side, every time they changed, so we found the exploit thingy where, they have the ownership tag next to questions,
Right.
or initially questions didn't have that, it was only reviews. So
Yeah.
then we were the ones that started that ball rolling where everyone had to leave a review to verify their purchase, which led to lots of people being annoyed that reviews were being spanked with just verifications.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and then, but we just like spent a day implementing that, which is to say, Fi
Yeah.
spent a day implementing that. But like, that's just us, and ideally, everyone should just be able to have that. But
Yeah.
not
That's,
everyone that is a creator can afford to spend a day, or in a lot of cases more, because Fi happens to be good at this stuff. But if you're
yeah.
just making like materials or something, if it was just me, I wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah.
I would just sit there and be miserable that I couldn't verify my users in any sane way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we've updated that various times. The moment the ownership tag appeared for questions, we moved the system to questions instead. so that we wouldn't be spamming the review score anymore, because that did feel unreasonable.
Yeah.
Although a lot of people did leave like 3-star reviews for that, because they were like, yeah, this is like a verification review. I don't know.
Oh, right. I see what you mean.
So wasn't necessarily always positive that we had them use reviews for that.
Okay.
But we moved that to questions, and then we've continuously updated that with API changes, and we have tried to make that in some form accessible to some of the other marketplace sellers as well,
Oh,
because
that's
we just want it to be out there. But the reality is, why are we the ones maintaining this?
yeah. Go
We
ahead.
shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And that sucks. I really like,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the gist of it. A lot of this stuff is annoying, but we can find workarounds because we have Phi doing insane technical shit all the time.
Yeah.
And we are like relatively business savvy and everything. We're good at finding loopholes and workarounds.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes time and resources, and that's a waste. And a lot of other people can't afford to do that,
Yeah.
even if they have the abilities. So we really wish that that wasn't the case, because it would just be better for the
Yeah.
creator ecosystem if all of this worked out of the box instead of requiring weird
Yeah.
workarounds.
That's true. Yeah, because when I join this discourse of plugin creators, asset creators, or whatever, I see I see like the verification process, and most of the time it's manual. You need to DM the creator, send the
Yeah.
information and so on. And I was just thinking, wow, that's like such time consuming for the creator for be like checking all the
Well,
DMs.
and for Epic as well is the annoying thing, because every time we verify someone using that process,
Yeah.
and in fact, for a while we had a system, although no, maybe not. Let's not say that, because I'm not sure if it's true. To be clear, not because it's bad, but we every time we verify someone manually, we have them DM us. We take note of their details, get like an order number and an Epic email. Then we mail Epic support, and we ask
Right.
Epic support, "Hey, do you
Mhm.
have this purchase on file?" And they have to go manually check their records and tell us yes or no. Which
Wow.
means that every time anyone verifies anything, an Epic employee has to go in and look through their records to find a purchase ID,
Yeah. Wow.
which is a humongous waste of time.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
So,
Honestly, it should
like,
be automatic. Yeah, automatic and
we've
everything.
we've had periods where we'd have 8 verifications a day, and we'd be like, yeah, we really don't want to just be sending
Yeah.
8 emails to
Oh,
Epic to like verify purchase
yeah.
IDs every day, but it is what it is. So yeah, oof.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I guess it's just but it's what it is. Hopefully,
Yep.
there'll be an
And they're
official.
working on it. They're doing things. They genuinely are trying. There's a lot of really nice and smart people working on this.
Yeah,
It's just hard
yeah,
in ways
it's
that
hard. It's hard.
are really hard to explain.
Yeah,
But there's a lot going on.
that's cool. It's good to know that they're working on things. But yeah, and just like wondering, yeah. So like, how do you guys like market the plugins overall and so on? Like because I know that the first version is kind of OG, let's say, it's been for some time, but I work with a lot of asset creators, and they always have trouble, marketing the assets and so on. So like you guys are big in the community, so I was just wondering how do you market yourself?
This is one of those things where we're just like in a bit of an unfair position relative to a lot of other creators, because we're pretty much the only ones that do this.
Yeah,
If you want to implement any sort of procedural terrain, any sort of interactive terrain, and you Google about this, you find us, because
yeah.
we are pretty much the only solution that exists.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Which means that it doesn't matter that much how much we market when it comes to just people finding us and knowing about our existence. When it comes to Voxel Plugin 2, we have been marketing more. We've been trying to show the features we're working on as we're
Yeah,
working on it, so that people just know that we're not dead. Because
we're not
if you look at the
yeah,
marketplace, it sure would look like we're dead. but we're not. So we try and push stuff on Twitter, and this is mostly just Fi posting stuff on his personal Twitter.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's kind of the extent of it. But then one of the perks with the stuff we do is that not all of it. We do also spend a lot of time on stuff that's really hard to market. But a lot of the stuff we do is really easy to market because we just make a video saying, look, it's a procedural terrain with nanite and displacement working.
Yeah, and everyone's like,
that,
wow.
that like sells itself. We
Yeah.
don't have to do that much. Because you record the video and it goes pretty well. So we have the benefit that we just easily stand out.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely, you guys found the perfect niche, honestly, to go into Unreal and just make something that there's not available. I think that's a trick also, because I see a lot of asset creators is making for example, combat systems once again, and I know that they're different or whatever, but if the asset creators are trying to make like, for example, a living out of assets or whatever in the marketplace, they could go into a more just obscure niche, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, all of the stupid standard business stuff that everybody hates applies, right? You got to do a market analysis. How are you going to be different from your competitors? And then the big one is, will your customers care? Like, will your customers actually care about the ways you're different from your competitor? And if no, your product isn't going to sell, because if your customers don't care about those differences and you have a competitor who's already established, everyone's just going to buy the established competitor. So you need something that makes people go, whoa, that's super cool, so that you draw visibility and that sets you apart. And that's possible even in dense niches.
Yeah, for sure.
But it definitely is much harder. And then the other benefit that we have in that sense is that the tech stack that we have is just really complicated.
Yeah.
And the product of, well, at this point, pretty much a decade of experience on Fi's side working specifically with voxels in Unreal, which means it's really hard to replicate. So, with a lot of marketplace stuff, other people can go in and be like, ooh, this thing is doing well. I can do that same thing, but I can afford to sell it for slightly less because my cost of living is lower or whatever. And then they do that, and with relatively small time investment, they can push out that product.
Yeah.
And relatively small time investment also means relatively small risk. Whereas with something like Voxel Plugin, good luck.
Good luck
beating
the kings.
Sure. And that's also a shame, because it'd be really good for the community and for the ecosystem if there was competition. But for us, from just a seller's perspective, it's really nice that we don't have to worry about competition for the most part.
Yeah, for sure.
And the easy thing to do, the main reason competition is good is because it forces people to be on their toes and to keep iterating and developing. I think we don't need competition to be doing that, because we just really are very passionate about what we're doing, and we're doing everything we reasonably can to make a really damn cool product, regardless of there not being competition.
I can see that.
But nonetheless, it would be better for the ecosystem probably if there was competition. But as a seller, you want to identify something where it's really hard for other people to compete.
Yeah.
So find something that you're good at and uniquely passionate about, and focusing on that, so that it's harder for other people to do what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. That's really cool. So what is the estimated date of Voxel Plugin 2? Is there any
we're still targeting Q1 2025.
Okay. Is that still on track?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
cool.
Gonna be tight. But I think we can reasonably make it, because the plugin, so we just finished a really big system reworked with materials and everything, which has us on unstable ground and a lot of crashes right now and stuff.
Yeah.
Which sucks, but also we're working them out and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then there's a refactor that we have in progress right now, which is hopefully going to be done at the end of this week. And then we need to implement sculpting. And that sounds huge, except because we have the entire stamp workflow and everything on the back end side, this mostly isn't that huge. So theoretically, sculpting should be relatively straightforward. So basically, the one big hitter task that remains for us to be able to release is sculpting.
Yeah, that's a big main thing. Okay.
And now I'm going to say something that may need to be cut out, which is that because I need to run this by Phi to make sure that I can share this, but we're going to do our best to make sure that we have a basic cubic system in Voxel Plugin 2's initial release. And it won't be super fancy, it won't be super complicated. It'll be similar to what we had in Voxel Plugin 1. Yeah. But it'll let you render worlds with blocks, and it'll let you sculpt them. So
that's amazing. That's so cool. Let's see. Wow, man! Honestly, I can't wait to try out the plugin and everything. It's gonna be so huge.
It's gonna be really weird to go into post-release phase.
Yeah, right. Where you guys are gonna be like weird. It's gonna be like it's out now.
Yeah, I finally get to tell people who are using Voxel Plugin 1 to just not. No, why are you doing this to yourself? Please use the new one. Because right now it keeps being people are using Voxel Plugin 1. And then I'm like, okay, well, can you use Voxel Plugin 2? Because it's much better and you have free access to it. And then they're like, no, I need sculpting. And I go, oh. And that's the end of the conversation, and then I try and help them figure out the issues they have with VP1. But VP2 really is much better. So
yeah, for sure.
So I'm excited to just being able to get everyone to VP2 instead.
Yeah,
I keep hitting my microphone today. I'm doing a lot of gestures.
It's like a boxing thing. All right, man. Well, it was a pleasure having you in. I think that we had a cool conversation. I think a lot of people are looking forward for the second version of the plugin and are just amazed by, your work and everything. So, I don't know if there's any final thing you want to say, but,
No, not especially. So just passing thoughts on Voxel Plugin. Voxel Plugin 2, if you're a technical artist or you want to get better at using materials, our voxel graphs are a really good playground for getting better at math, because it's the exact same kind of GPU style logic. You don't have neighbor values and that sort of thing. You just have to do math. But in our graph system, we have a really good preview system where you can just hit a node and press R, and then you can see what all the values are, and it makes things a lot easier. So it makes it way easier to visualize math, because you can just go okay, so I have a noise value that's between -1 and 1, but I need it to be 0 to 1, so I'm going to add 1 and divide it by 2, and then you preview, and then you see that it is now indeed between 0 and 1. So it makes way easier to make sense of numbers and math operations.
Easier.
So that's just a random note, which I feel is undervalued. Use the preview system in our voxel graphs and use it to get better intuition for math and numbers and stuff, because it's really good for that.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. Yeah, you guys have a whole bunch of tools, man. Kind of crazy. You could make a whole engine out of the That's cool.
All right. It's been really fun to talk. Thank you very much for having me on as the first guest.
Man,
it's been
thanks
an honor.
for coming.
And
it's cool because you're the first guest of the podcast. I've been trying to do this for over the year. But yeah, it's cool stuff. We'll keep in touch. And for everyone, I will link their website and Discord in the description, so you can join the community and just engage with them. Yeah, Victor, it was a pleasure, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.